Over the past month, have you noticed your grocery bill climbing higher and higher each week? If so, you are far from alone. America is facing a food crisis unlike anything in its history. It is not that we are running out of food, but that the cost of every meal is becoming a heavy burden. And this is only the beginning. When Trump rolled out tariffs of 15 to 50%, food prices across the country began rising with no end in sight. Everything from cans of soup and cartons of milk to bags of coffee has been swept into this wave of price hikes. In some states, the increase has been barely noticeable, but in others, grocery bills have ballooned almost overnight. And while many people are still trying to figure out what is going on, the list of the 10 states hit hardest by food price shocks is starting to take shape. Is your state on that list? Let's take a closer look at the 10 states where residents are now facing the highest food prices ever recorded. Number 1. California. Less than 2 weeks after the new import tariffs took effect, California, the most populous state in the nation, was already feeling the impact on every grocery bill. What shocked people was not the price jump on luxury goods, but on the everyday items they buy without thinking. A bag of Fuji apples that used to hover around $4 is now hitting $6. Regular fresh chicken, a staple in almost every shopping trip, has gone up nearly $2 per pound. For a family of 4, groceries alone are now draining an extra $50 to $70 a week. Major supermarket chains like Safeway, Ralph's, and Trader Joe's have already posted new prices across many aisles. According to USDA data, the average price of fresh chicken in California has risen 12% compared to July, while frozen seafood, especially shrimp and fish imported from Asia, has jumped as much as 18%. Staples like jasmine rice, canola oil, and imported spices have all climbed in price as shipping costs through the Los Angeles Long Beach port spike under the new tariffs. The price pressure is not only squeezing consumers, but also hitting small restaurants and local markets hard. A survey by the California Restaurant Association found that 47% of owners have adjusted their menus within the first 10 days of August, cutting dishes that rely on imported ingredients or sourcing replacements from within the state. Even so, California still has an advantage over many other states thanks to its rich network of local farms. Weekend farmers markets in Sacramento, San Diego, and San Jose have seen attendance rise by 15 to 20% compared to last year, according to the California Farmers Bureau. Here, shoppers can find fresh produce at more stable prices unaffected by import tariffs. Experts recommend that residents make the most of in-state food sources and consider buying in groups to get better deals. Keeping an eye on regular supermarket discounts, especially senior specials, can also add up to big savings. Still, the bigger question remains: if even California, the nation's top agricultural producer, is being forced to change its eating habits in under 2 weeks, what kind of challenges lie ahead for states that are far less self-sufficient? Number 2. Hawaii. If in California, rising food prices have made people think twice, in Hawaii, the situation is far more intense. From the very start of August, residents of Honolulu and Maui have seen prices jump across nearly every category. Whole milk, an everyday essential, is up 14% in just 1 month. Chicken, often chosen as a cheaper alternative to beef, has risen another 12%. A bag of plain white sandwich bread now hits $6, while a familiar can of Campbell's soup costs almost $1 more than it did in July. Hawaii has always been heavily dependent on imports from the mainland. When the Trump administration's new tariffs hit especially on goods from Asia and shipments passing through West Coast ports, every cost went up. Tariffs on steel and aluminum made containers and packaging more expensive. Fuel prices jumped 8% in a single month, adding thousands of dollars to every ship and plane carrying food to the islands. All of this was passed straight into retail prices, and Hawaiians, who already pay the highest grocery costs in the country, are now enduring yet another wave of price hikes. Imagine a family in Oahu simply trying to stick to a modest meal plan of eggs, milk, bread, lettuce, and chicken. They are now paying $70 to $80 more each month than they did just weeks ago. So which item would you cut? Or would you keep it all and give up something else like gas money or a weekend outing? It is not just households feeling the strain. Local restaurants are hurting too. A small eatery in Waikiki, once famous for its fresh ahi poke, has been forced to either shrink portions or switch to frozen fish imported from other countries because the cost of shipping tuna from the mainland has jumped over 20%. Would you still want to pay premium prices for a meal that no longer has the same quality? If prices keep climbing, Hawaii will face a tough choice: either rely entirely on costly shipments from the mainland or figure out how to produce more food locally, a challenge given the high land and production costs on the islands. The question is, can a paradise still keep its charm when even the locals struggle to afford their daily meals? Number 3. New York. In New York, eating habits mirror the city's fast-paced lifestyle. People rely heavily on quick stops like pizza slice joints, morning bagel shops, all-night delis, and fast food counters. This is a place where a hot coffee and a cold-cut sandwich can be breakfast, and a $1.50 slice of pizza used to be the go-to quick lunch. But this August, those familiar prices are changing in ways few can stomach. The cost of a typical slice in Manhattan has jumped from $1.50 to nearly $2.50, not just because imported cheese and flour are pricier, but also because olive oil and canned tomatoes from Italy and Spain now face new tariffs. That morning coffee made from South American beans, once $2, is now $2.60. Even the classic New York bagel with cream cheese has shot up nearly 20% in just 30 days, driven by higher prices for imported milk and cream. In markets like Chinatown and Little Italy, the signature ingredients of immigrant communities are getting pulled into the same spiral. Pasta fish sauce, spices, soybeans. All cost more due to tariffs and higher shipping fees. Picture a ramen shop in the East Village having to tack on $3 extra per bowl just to cover rising transport costs from the West Coast as fuel prices climb. New York stands out for eating out more than cooking at home, so food price spikes do not just hit supermarket shelves. They land directly on restaurant tables. Every time the bill goes up, customers have to choose between eating less, ordering cheaper, or simply staying home. And it is only August. When winter comes, higher energy demand will push up the costs of transport, storage, and ingredients even more. Can a city famous for its food diversity keep its identity when once accessible favorites start feeling like luxuries? If you lived in New York, would you give up your hot slice, your morning coffee, or your cream cheese bagel to save a few dollars? Number 4. Alaska. In Alaska, a trip to the grocery store can feel like gearing up for a treasure hunt. Residents here depend almost entirely on shipments from other states and from Canada, since the frigid climate makes year-round farming nearly impossible. That means any shock to tariffs or transportation costs hits their wallets directly. This August, that impact is showing up on every receipt. A gallon of milk in Anchorage can now reach $8 to $9. Frozen chicken is up nearly 25% from last month. And fresh fruits like apples and oranges shipped from California or routed through Vancouver are up 18%. Imagine a family paying close to $30 for just a few basic breakfast items. In remote communities like Nome or Barrow, the situation is even tougher. Goods must be flown in or shipped by sea over thousands of miles often, with added storage fees from delayed schedules. With new tariffs on imports from Canada and Asia, wholesale costs are climbing, pushing retail prices to levels many in the lower 48 would find hard to believe. A small shop in Fairbanks that once sold imported smoked salmon as a tourist specialty has had to drop it from the menu after import costs nearly doubled. In Kotzebue, a grocery store owner says customers are buying less, opting for cheap canned goods and instant noodles instead of fresh food. Faced with that choice, would you prioritize price or nutrition when standing in front of the shelves? One thing unique to Alaska is that people are used to stocking up months' worth of food to get through the long winter. But when prices are already this high in summer, the amount of money needed to stockpile enough for the whole family becomes more than many can manage. The big question is how many families will be forced to cut back portions this winter, and will remote communities be able to receive the supplies they need? In most states, price hikes are an inconvenience. In Alaska, they can determine the meals for an entire season. And as long as these tariffs remain in place, the state's geography, already a challenge, will become an even bigger barrier to everyday living. Number 5. Illinois. Illinois has long taken pride in being one of America's top agricultural hubs, especially for corn and soybeans. You might think that would shield the state from the worst of the price storm, but the reality is the opposite. When Canada and several trade partners rolled out retaliatory tariffs in early August, exports fell, inventories piled up, yet grocery prices still climbed. Why? Because many of Illinois' processed foods and consumer goods come from the very markets now hit with tariffs. Walk through a supermarket in Chicago, and you will see the contradiction right away. Corn and soybeans, the state's powerhouse crops, may not have spiked much, but beef, milk, cheese, and especially imported cooking oils have shot up. Olive oil from Europe is up more than 20%. Beef from other states now carries higher transport costs, thanks to expensive fuel, pushing the price of ground beef 15% higher than last month. At local farmers markets, produce sellers complain that fertilizer imported from Canada and South America has hit record prices, driving up planting and harvesting costs. A farm owner outside Springfield says they now have to plan every truck trip into the city carefully because fuel and toll expenses make it impossible to drive back empty. Have you ever thought about how the price of a bunch of greens in the store can rise simply because a truck had to travel farther than expected? Illinois is unique in its mix of industrial food demand in big cities and traditional consumption habits in rural areas. When prices climb, rural residents can fall back on partial self-sufficiency, but in Chicago, Aurora, or Naperville, people are left cutting spending or settling for cheaper, lower-quality products. The question is, can a state with such strong agricultural roots truly feed itself when global supply chains and input costs still have such a strong influence? And if people in the heart of America's breadbasket are struggling to afford daily meals, how will the rest of the country cope with the next round of price hikes? Number 6. Washington. Washington has long been famous for its apples, cherries, salmon, and wine, signature products that are both a source of state pride and a major export revenue stream. But since early August, when retaliatory tariffs from Canada and Asia took effect, the picture has changed. The irony is that even though Washington produces so much of its own food, grocery prices here are still climbing fast. Let's start with Seattle's Pike Place Market, the state's culinary icon. Premium apples this season are 12% more expensive than last year, not because of shortages, but because sorting, packaging, and shipping costs have all gone up. Fresh salmon from Puget Sound, once a staple for restaurants, now costs nearly 20% more due to spiking cold storage fees and fuel costs for transport. In Spokane and Tacoma, the impact is even more visible on imported goods, which still make up a large share of everyday consumption. Coffee beans from South America, olive oil from Europe, and specialty cheeses have all surged in price under the new tariffs. As these items go up, coffee shops, pizza joints, and small restaurants are forced to adjust menus, shrink portions, or raise prices. Would you still grab your favorite latte as often if it cost an extra $1 after just a few weeks? Washington is also unique in its preference for fresh, overpackaged food, which makes residents more sensitive to swings in produce and seafood prices. A storm offshore or a shipment delayed by just a few days can trigger immediate jumps at the market. And with global shipping routes slowed down by tariffs, these delays are happening more often. Many worry that winter will not only increase energy demand, but also limit the supply of fresh produce from other states. When that happens, even an agricultural powerhouse like Washington will need to import more from outside, at higher costs. If a place as rich in farm and seafood resources as Washington cannot escape the price spiral, what kind of pressure will fall on states that rely entirely on imports? And if you lived here, how would you prepare for the months ahead when every meal is bound to cost more? Number 7. Michigan. Sundays in Michigan are usually all about football, the roar of the crowd, and a table piled high with pizza-grilled chicken wings, buttered popcorn, and cold beer. But this August, many families are slimming down their game day menus. At a store in Lansing, a tray of frozen chicken wings that used to sell for $9 has now jumped to over $12. The store owner quietly explained that the reason isn't just higher feed costs imported from Canada due to new tariffs, but also record-high shipping expenses across the Great Lakes region. Meanwhile, domestic beer prices have climbed a few percent because both barley and aluminum for cans are being hit by tariff-related price hikes. Have you ever stopped in the aisle and put a can of beer back after seeing the new price at farmers markets near Traverse City cherries, the pride of the state, are still on display, but a jar of artisanal cherry jam now costs nearly $2 more because imported cane sugar and glass jars have both become pricier. Vendors say they've never seen ingredient costs spike so fast. What's worrying is that Michigan's winters are long and fresh produce will soon give way to goods shipped from far away. When that happens already, high prices will keep climbing. Residents are starting to think ahead, buying frozen goods early, stocking up during sales, or sharing bulk purchases with neighbors to save money. The question is, if even Michigan's sacred football feasts are being cut back because of costs, what will happen to everyday meals? And if you lived here, which dish would you drop first to keep your wallet breathing? Number 8. Florida. August morning in Miami, you walk into your usual beachfront cafe, the fresh squeezed orange juice, Florida's signature drink. That used to be $3 is now close to $4.50. The barista sighs and explains that local oranges aren't enough to meet demand, so they've had to import from Mexico and Brazil, where new tariffs are pushing prices up by the day. Florida prides itself on being the fruit basket of the Southeast, but its supply chain depends heavily on imports. Premium seafood for tourists, lobster, tuna, scallops, mostly comes from the Caribbean and South America. With tariffs added to fuel costs for transporting goods from port to restaurant, retail prices have spiked fast. In Key West, a seafood dinner for two now costs $15, $20 more than it did just weeks ago. But it's not just tourists who feel the difference. Locals in Tampa and Orlando are noticing the squeeze too, as imported rice cooking oil and coffee, all staples in many households, have all jumped in price. Even frozen tilapia fillets at the supermarket no longer stay under $10 a bag. Would you be willing to switch to a cheaper, lower quality option? Florida also faces hurricane season, which typically falls in late summer and early fall. Just one strong storm can disrupt food supplies and send prices soaring overnight. Residents are used to stocking up on water-canned goods, rice and noodles before hurricane season. But this year, those stockpiles will cost a lot more. Small grocery store owners inland admit they're cutting back on fresh inventory, afraid they won't sell it in time at such high prices. This only limits consumer choices further. And in a state with over 20 million residents plus millions of tourists each year, the pressure on the food supply chain is nothing to underestimate. If even Florida, with its fertile land and bustling ports, can't escape the spiral of rising prices. Is there any paradise left where meals remain affordable? And if you lived here, which flavor of Florida would you sacrifice first to keep costs under control? Number 9. Nevada. In Las Vegas, the neon lights still shine bright and the slot machines keep ringing, but the menus at the city's famous buffets have quietly changed. The lobster that once starred on the seafood table has been replaced by smaller crayfish. The reason isn't just the spike in import costs from Asia and South America due to new tariffs, but also the record-high expense of trucking shipments across the desert. Nevada doesn't have large-scale agriculture like many other states, so most food has to be brought in from California, Arizona, or even farther. When produce prices rise in California, the effect reaches supermarkets in Reno and Henderson almost immediately. A bag of pre-mixed salad that used to be $4 is now close to $6. Fresh tomatoes and cucumbers imported from Mexico also carry extra tariff and inspection fees, pushing their price per pound up by 20 to 25% in just a few weeks. What's unique about Nevada is that its food consumption outside the home is much higher than in most states thanks to tourism and entertainment. When ingredient costs rise, hotels and casinos are forced to adjust menus or raise prices. A buffet that used to cost $39 has now hit $49 and even more on weekends. Would you still be willing to pay if your favorite dish disappeared or got served in smaller portions? In residential neighborhoods, things aren't much better. Locals who are used to buying affordable packaged and frozen foods are now paying 10 to 15% more for frozen beef and chicken, thanks to rising cold storage and refrigerated transport costs. Middle-income families are turning to bulk buying and splitting portions to save money, or taking advantage of last-minute supermarket discounts. Nevada also faces a unique challenge. Extreme heat drives up the need for refrigeration, sending electricity costs for storage facilities to record levels. This is yet another factor making it harder for food prices to come down anytime soon. Number 10. Massachusetts. In Boston, it's a familiar sight. Waterfront restaurants packed with people enjoying lobster scallops and fresh oysters. But this August, many diners hesitate when they pick up the menu. Lobster is more than $8 a pound higher than at the start of the year. Restaurant owners explain that higher fuel costs for fishing boats and tariffs on certain imported ingredients, from butter to wine, are making it impossible to keep prices down. Massachusetts prides itself on its seafood and organic farming, but its reliance on imported supplementary goods makes it vulnerable to trade disruptions. For example, much of the corn used to feed dairy cows and poultry comes from the Midwest. When drought and shipping costs push prices up there, the impact is felt almost immediately at the milk, cheese, and chicken counters in supermarkets from Cambridge to Worcester. One hallmark of Massachusetts food culture is a love of fresh products, especially in summer and early fall, when seafood festivals and farmers markets are everywhere. But this year, many families are changing habits instead of buying fresh seafood at the market. They're choosing frozen or smaller sizes to save money. Would you swap Cape Cod oysters for frozen oysters from another state if the price was cut in half? In the Boston area, lobster rolls have hit $38 to $40, forcing some restaurants to find creative ways to keep customers, reducing the amount of lobster, adding more salad or fries. Meanwhile, schools and hospitals across the state report higher cafeteria costs, pushing them to cut some nutrient-rich items to balance their budgets. Massachusetts also has long, cold winters, which means much of its produce must be brought in from southern states or overseas. When those shipping routes are affected by tariffs and fuel costs, a sharp year-end spike in food prices becomes almost inevitable. If even a state with a rich culinary tradition, a working waterfront, and abundant seafood like Massachusetts is feeling the squeeze, it's clear this price spiral is sparing no one. And if you lived here, would you stick to your usual menu or come up with creative new meals to keep your wallet from bleeding every time you shop? Looking across these 10 states, it's clear that the wave of rising food prices is spreading faster than many realize. From lively California to historic Massachusetts, from remote Hawaii to the neon glow of Nevada, no place is immune from the impact of tariffs, transport costs, and a shaky global supply chain. Even more troubling is that with every passing week, these higher prices become the new normal, forcing people to constantly adjust the way they shop and eat.
This video does not promote division within the United States or encourage education. All content is presented for the purpose of exploration, analysis, and fostering discussion based on current events, public sentiment, and social trends. We fully respect the United States Constitution and all federal regulations. If today's analysis made you think, drop a comment so we can keep the conversations going. And don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the bell so you will never miss our next independent deep dive.